Another World, or Out of This World as it was called in North America, is one of my favorite games ever. I absolutely love that game. It blew my mind back in the day. And I still feel like that today. I'm really happy it's coming to the Switch at some point this year. But I just love those type of games. Another World, Flashback, Heart of Darkness, Heart of the Alien, those kinds of well, Wikipedia tells me they're called cinematic platformer action adventure games. So I guess that's what the genre is. But yeah, I don't know what it is about that type of game, but it just resonates with me on a really deep level. There's just something I find so engaging about them. And that is exactly what The Way Remastered is. It is a love letter to those type of games, and it's a love letter for the good parts and a love letter for the bad parts, and it feels like it's ripped right out of that same era of those games. As far as story goes, I'm going to tell you something you learn right in the beginning of the game, so I don't consider it spoiler, and it's kind of the jumping point for the whole experience. You play as this guy who lost the love of his life, his significant other, and he is looking to bring her back to life by doing certain things. I don't want to spoil it, but he's heard rumors of a way that this can be achieved, so he sets out on a mission to make this happen. And that's your whole motivation for what you're doing in The Way Remastered. And it will take you to all kinds of exotic locations and all over the universe, all in search of a way to bring this person back to life. So what are these cinematic platformer action-adventure games, just in case you haven't played any of the ones that I named, or, there's other ones out there. But if you haven't played them, here's what you do. You run around, you jump, there's side-scrollers, you explore landscapes, you solve puzzles, and there's some trial and error for action scenes, and that's exactly what's in The Way Remastered. When I think about classic cinematic platformers, I remember there being a lot more in the way of trial and error, and I'm not saying that's something I miss, because, it's part of the genre, but it's not exactly a fun part. And The Way Remastered certainly has its moments where it's trial and error, because you're being chased from something, and you go one way and it's not the right way, or you go to jump and it takes you down the wrong path, whatever. But by and large, they do away with most of that stuff. So I know that's a big point of contention for people. A lot of people get frustrated with that kind of mechanic. And again, I can understand that. So I'm happy to see they kind of steered away from that in The Way Remastered. But everything else that comes with the cinematic platformer genre is definitely here. The bulk of your time in The Way Remastered will be spent doing puzzles, platforming puzzles, but again, that's part of the genre. So you'll do things like take water from one portion of a level to another by rotating pipes and figuring out the right path to get it to where you need it to go. You'll have to hunt down access codes to gain entry to certain areas of levels that you need to get into to collect items and stuff like that. There will be enemies that are blocking your way, and you can't just attack them. You have to figure out a way to manipulate the environment to continue on. So stuff like that. And you're going to get to some pretty sophisticated puzzles when you make it further into the game, because you're going to get special abilities. There's 4 special abilities that you come across. There's telekinesis, so you'll be able to move, select things. There's something that basically lets you interact with a certain type of technology. I don't want to give away more details than that. There's a shield that you can spin around your body, so it lets you deflect shots and lasers and other stuff in all different directions. And then there is the ability to teleport yourself to a location that you've already been once. So basically, you leave behind like a shadow. You go ahead and you do something else, and then you teleport back to where you were. So when you combine all 4 of these together, you can see that there's going to be some pretty lengthy and confusing puzzles, but confusing in a good way. Some of these puzzles are going to be very enjoyable. I'd say the large majority of them are very enjoyable, but there's a couple in there that are frustrating because they require a lot of legwork and very specific movements and stuff like that. And sometimes you're like, I know what I need to do. I just can't get it done. But again, that's part of this genre. So, you know, I've been playing these type of games for a very long time. So this kind of thing doesn't frustrate me, but I know it will make probably a good amount of people angry. So I just need to point that out. There are going to be puzzles that are frustrating because you'll have to do some trial and error. But hopefully you'll get through them without too much trouble and they won't turn you off to the game. And like I said, I say by and large the puzzles here are very well done. There's actually some really smart puzzles included in this that I don't want to spoil. But yeah, you know, they can't all be great. So hopefully people will be able to get by those and continue on the whole journey, because I really find it an enjoyable one. Another bit of baggage that comes with the genre and is present in the Way Remastered is knowing what you can interact with in any given scene. So, because I've played a lot of these, usually I can pretty easily decipher what a puzzle wants and what items are in that scene that I can actually use. But there were a couple instances where I was like, oh, I didn't even know I could walk over there. I didn't even know I could interact with that thing. But throughout my whole experience, I'd say I spent maybe like 5 minutes on stuff like that. So again, that might be more of a sticking point for other people who don't usually play these type of games, because you might get stuck for a very long time in a particular scene because you didn't know you could use something there. You didn't know something in the scene was able to be interacted with. But hopefully that doesn't come up. And then going hand in hand with that is the ability to judge what platforms you can and cannot stand on. Sometimes you think a ledge will let you walk to a certain point and it doesn't. You fall. Or sometimes you're like, can I jump to that platform? Can I stand on that? And you take your leap of faith and you're like, nope, couldn't stand there. So you find out the hard way. But thankfully, the checkpoints here are very good about putting you back pretty much right where you were, if not extremely close to where you were. And loading is like non-existent. You die and you're right back into the game, so you don't have to wait a long time either, because you will die. It's going to happen a lot. So thankfully you don't have to wait a long time. And it might sound like I'm being an apologist for this kind of stuff, because I've played this genre multiple times through all different games, and you know, I'm used to it. So on one hand, I'm like, oh, it doesn't really bother me. This is just comes with the territory. And then on the other hand, I'm like, man, all these years later and all these new developers, and they still can't find a way to make these problems go away. Like, you know, it is kind of frustrating, but I don't know. I'm not a game developer. Maybe there's just certain things. If you want the game to look a certain way and feel a certain way, that these problems are just going to be there. So I don't know. As long as you're a fan of the genre, or you're willing to look past that stuff, then I think you'll be perfectly fine. But I can understand those who get frustrated and turned off by it. There's no doubt that the Way Remastered is looking to invoke feelings of nostalgia for games like Out of This World and Heart of Darkness. And for the most part, it does a great job with that. But there are some elements where I feel it's a little lackluster. I mean, for fans of the genre, you're no doubt going to compare this game to some of the best out there. And Heart of Darkness and Out of This World and Flashback and stuff like that, they had some really amazing visuals for the time and some extremely well done animation. And that's not really here in the Way Remastered. There are times when the game looks absolutely beautiful. There's some breathtaking scenery and stuff like that, some really nice pixel art, but there's other times where it just doesn't look all that good. It's pretty ho-hum. And then the animation, I would say, overall, is just not anywhere near what it is in those classic games. And, you know, that might not be such a bad thing, because the animation in those games, those earlier games, got in the way of the gameplay. Like, you had to control your character based around the animations. It's not like playing a platformer like a Mario game where you just press the direction and they go that direction, you stop and they stop, and, you know, controls are spot on. In those classic cinematic adventure games or cinematic platformers, characters would have to run through their animations before they let you perform something else. So you'd kind of have to anticipate what you needed to do or what button needed to be pressing. You'd have to time it based on the animation. So I do like the visuals of that. I would imagine people will find that extremely frustrating today, because there's not many games that are like that. So as a fan of the genre, I'm sad to see that style or that level of detail in the animation isn't here, but it does make for controls that are at least a little bit better. I would say They're more responsive than what I got in those classic games, so that's a good thing. But I do miss that level of animation. One of the areas the Way Remastered beats those classic games is the soundtrack. Those classic cinematic platformers had music, but it was very few and far between, and it was very short clips of stuff. Usually you were running around and doing what you had to do in silence. All, you know, sound effects but no music. The Way Remastered has music in almost every part of the game, and it's extremely well done. It does a great job of heightening the experience, and, you know, it's not stuff you're gonna put on your iPhone and play in your car. It's not that type of music, but it's moody and atmospheric and world building, and I was honestly very surprised. I didn't expect to have such a great soundtrack in this game, and I really enjoyed it. It really did a lot to add to the experience. This is The Way Remastered, a remastered version of The Way. So what's the remastered part of it? They say that this has game and level design changes based on players' feedback. Well, I didn't play the original, so I can't speak to those. Same goes for graphical improvements. I wouldn't know them because I didn't play it the first time around. There's a music player, so you can listen to that great music that I was telling you about. There's also HD Rumble, which I think they did a great job with. There's a lot of it here. It's used for like elevators and some weapons and ships that you ride and all kinds of stuff. And they did a really good job of tying it to the animations and the sound effects that are going on, so I think it adds a nice little bit to the game. I really enjoyed it. And then finally there's voiceover, and to be honest, it's not that good. The good news is you can turn it off if you want. This is going to sound mean, and I don't mean it in a mean way, but it definitely affects the voice acting. The person who plays the main character, I feel, doesn't speak English as their first language, so it leads to some inflection issues and some pacing issues with how they read lines. There's also some lines of dialogue that are just written strangely, like, I don't know, it's written in ways that people don't speak, so it sounds weird. But again, minor issues, not a big deal by any means, and like I said, if the voice acting really gets on your nerves, you can turn it off. But yeah, I never heard anything that just took me out of the experience or ruined the game for me, so just little minor complaints. The Way Remastered is a very interesting game to review because it's gonna come across very differently for all different types of players. If you're a fan of those cinematic platformers that I talked about, or that genre in general, I would highly recommend checking out this game because I really enjoyed it. Like I said at the beginning of the review, it feels like it was ripped right out of that era. They did an excellent job at that. It feels like the games it's paying homage to, but it does so by making its own story and its own gameplay and its own puzzles and stuff like that. It's not like, hey, remember this? You're doing this here. Hey, remember that? You're doing it again. You know, it feels like a new game in that old style of gameplay. So yeah, I definitely recommend it to fans of that genre. Now, if you've never played that genre before, I don't know. That's a tough one. Because you're going to be like, why the hell is it like this? There's going to be certain things you come across where you're like, why would they have this in a game? Why is this a mechanic? Why does it act like this? So it's not the most friendly genre. Even when the genre was new and those games were first coming out, it was a flawed genre to begin with because of the trial and error and the animations and stuff like that. It's not everybody's cup of tea. I know every game isn't everybody's cup of tea, but, you know, this is a subset of that. So if you're willing to be open-minded and you like the idea of an interesting story that's being told in a more cinematic way through gameplay rather than cutscenes, this might be up your alley. But if you're someone who's easily frustrated, I think you might want to stay away from this because it's not going to be forgiving, and you're likely to get very fed up pretty early on. But yeah, I loved the game. I really did, but that's just me. I'm a huge fan of this type of game, so it was exactly what I wanted, and it surprised me in some ways with some neat little twists and turns and some gameplay tweaks and some tips of the hat to the older games that I've loved for a long time now. So for me, I loved it. Really enjoyed it. Hey guys, RMC here from Go Nintendo. If you like what you saw in the video, why don't you give us a thumbs up and maybe even subscribe? We'd love to have you. If you want to see what else we're up to, you can check out GoNintendo.com for 24-hour Nintendo news. You can visit us on Facebook at Facebook.com/GoNintendo. You can check us out on Twitter at Twitter.com/GoNintendoTweet. And we're even over on Instagram at instagram.com/GoNintendo. I put all the links in the description just to make it easier for you guys to follow. Thanks a lot.